The dust devils swirled across the parched earth of Eleanor Harper's ranch as she stood on the porch, clutching the foreclosure notice that would destroy everything her late husband had built, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from the rage of a woman who had already lost too much to let a bank take what remained of her life. It was the summer of 1882 in Abilene, Texas, and the drought had lasted 3 years. The cattle that once grazed across 200 acres of Harper land now numbered less than 30. The creek that fed the property had dwindled to a muddy trickle, and the bank in town had grown tired of waiting for Eleanor to make good on the loan her husband Thomas had taken out before the fever claimed him 18 months ago. She was 24 years old, a widow with no family, no money, and 30 days to come up with $800 or lose everything. Eleanor read the notice again, though she had memorized every cruel word. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly, hung loose around her shoulders. She had not slept well in weeks. The numbers swam before her eyes, mocking her with their impossibility. $800 might as well have been $8,000. The cattle she had left would not fetch half that amount in their current condition, and even if she sold every stick of furniture, every tool, every possession she owned, she would still fall short. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road. A lone rider approached, sitting tall in the saddle despite the oppressive heat. Even from a distance, she could see he was a stranger. Abilene was small enough that she knew every man, woman, and child within 20 miles. This cowboy was new. He rode a bay mare that looked well cared for despite the dust of travel. As he drew closer, Eleanor could make out his features beneath the wide brim of his hat. He was young, perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in spring. His jaw was strong, covered with a few days' growth of beard, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of a man who had seen his share of trouble and survived it. The cowboy reined in his horse at the edge of her property and removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and respectful, "name is Quinn Vaughn. I am looking for work. Heard in town there might be ranches hiring." Eleanor almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. "You heard wrong, Mr. Vaughn. Nobody is hiring in these parts. The drought has seen to that." Quinn's gaze swept across the property, taking in the sagging fence posts, the barn that needed repairs, the sparse pastures. His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps, or pity. Eleanor bristled at the thought. "Seems like you could use a hand, though," he said carefully. "I am good with horses, decent with cattle, and I can fix just about anything that is broken. I do not need much, just food and a place to sleep." "I cannot pay you," Eleanor said flatly. She saw no point in pretending otherwise. "I cannot even pay the bank what I owe them. In 30 days this will not be my land anymore." Quinn was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eleanor felt exposed under his gaze. She lifted her chin defiantly, refusing to look away. "That is a shame," he said finally. "It is a good piece of land, would be better with some work and rain." "Well, I cannot make it rain, and I cannot make money appear out of thin air," Eleanor replied, her voice sharper than she intended. The weight of her situation pressed down on her, and this stranger's kindness only made it worse. She did not want pity. She wanted solutions, and there were none. Quinn put his hat back on and gathered his reins. For a moment, Eleanor thought he would simply ride away and she would never see him again. But he hesitated. "Madam, if you do not mind me asking, what would it take to keep this place?" $800, Eleanor said bitterly. "And I have about $23 to my name," Quinn nodded slowly. "And if you had a husband, would the bank extend the loan if there was a man to vouch for the debt, Eleanor stared at him, not quite understanding. "I suppose they might, but I do not have a husband. Mine is buried on the hill yonder, and he is not coming back to vouch for anything." "I am sorry for your loss," Quinn said, and he sounded genuine. "But I was not talking about him. I was talking about me." The words hung in the hot, still air between them. Eleanor's heart began to pound, though whether from shock or anger or something else entirely, she could not say. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am completely serious, madam. You need a husband to keep your land. I need a place to stay. Seems like we could help each other." "You do not even know me," Eleanor protested. "And I certainly do not know you. You could be anyone. A thief, a murderer, a man running from the law." "I am none of those things," Quinn said calmly. "I am just a cowboy who has been drifting too long and is tired of having nothing to call his own. This arrangement would benefit us both. You keep your land and I get a place to settle. We can make it a business arrangement if you like. I will work the ranch, help you get back on your feet. If the bank needs a husband's name on the papers to feel better about the loan, I can provide that." Eleanor's mind reeled. The proposal was outrageous, impossible, completely improper. No respectable woman would even consider such a thing. And yet, as she stood there looking at this stranger with his calm eyes and steady voice, she found herself actually thinking about it. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "What is in it for you, really?" Quinn looked out across the land again, and something in his expression softened. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana. My father lost it when I was 17. Bank foreclosed, just like they are doing to you. We had nowhere to go. My mother died that winter. My father drank himself to death the following spring. I have been drifting ever since, working other men's land, building other men's dreams. I am tired of it. This is not charity, madam. This is me trying to have something of my own, even if it is only half mine in name." The raw honesty in his voice struck something deep in Eleanor's chest. She understood loss. She understood the desperate need to hold onto the last piece of what mattered, and she understood pride. "It would be a marriage in name only," she said slowly, hardly believing the words coming out of her mouth. "Separate sleeping arrangements, a business partnership, nothing more." "Agreed," Quinn said. "And if we cannot make this work, if the bank forecloses anyway, you do not blame me and you ride on with no hard feelings." "Agreed." Eleanor took a deep breath. This was madness, complete and utter madness. But what choice did she have? In 30 days she would lose everything anyway. At least this way she had a chance. "All right, Mr. Vaughn, we have an agreement." Quinn dismounted and walked toward her, extending his hand. Eleanor shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. His hand was warm and steady, and for just a moment she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. "We should go into town tomorrow," Quinn said. "Talk to the bank, see the preacher, make this official." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "You can put your horse in the barn. There is a spare room in the house. It is not much, but it has a bed." "That is more than I have had in a while, madam. I am grateful. Call me Eleanor. If we are going to be married, even in name only, you should use my given name." "Eleanor," Quinn repeated, and the way he said it, soft and careful, made her shiver despite the heat. "You can call me Quinn." That night, Eleanor lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she had done. In the room down the hall, she could hear the soft sounds of Quinn settling in. It felt strange to have another person in the house. Since Thomas died, she had been alone, and the silence had become her companion. Now that silence was broken, and she did not know how to feel about it. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned together. He had been a good man, hardworking and kind, but their marriage had been practical more than passionate. They had known each other since childhood, and marrying him had felt like the natural progression of things. She had cared for him, even loved him in her way, but there had been no great romance, no sweeping passion. Just two people building a life together because it made sense. This arrangement with Quinn was even more practical, stripped of any pretense of affection. And yet, there had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something in the way he spoke about loss and drifting and wanting something to call his own. She sensed a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to fight for survival in a world that did not make it easy. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of dust and debt and a stranger's steady gaze. The next morning, Eleanor rose before dawn as always. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was still respectable. When she went to the kitchen, she found Quinn already awake, stoking the fire in the stove. "Thought I would make myself useful," he said. "Coffee is almost ready." "Thank you," Eleanor said, surprised. Thomas had never made coffee. That had always been her job. They ate a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and the last of the bacon, speaking little. The reality of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. After they finished eating, they hitched up Eleanor's wagon, and Quinn saddled his mare to follow behind. The ride into Abilene took an hour. The town was small, consisting of a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a bank, and a handful of other businesses. As they rolled down the dusty street, Eleanor could feel eyes on them. News traveled fast in small towns, and a strange cowboy riding with the widow Harper would fuel gossip for weeks. They stopped first at the bank, a squat brick building that seemed to radiate disapproval. Inside, the air was cooler but no more welcoming. The bank manager, Horace Winters, looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who had been interrupted during important business. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his tone formal and cold, "I trust you received our notice." "I did, Mr. Winters," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "That is why I am here. I would like to discuss the terms of my loan." Winters leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "I am afraid there is nothing to discuss." The terms were quite clear. You have 30 days to pay the balance in full, or the property will be seized to satisfy the debt. "I understand that," Eleanor said, "but circumstances have changed. I would like to introduce you to my fiancé, Quinn Vaughn." Winter's gaze shifted to Quinn, who stood beside Eleanor with his hat in his hands. The banker's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Fiancé? This is quite sudden, Mrs. Harper. I was not aware you were courting anyone." "It happened quickly," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice calm. "But we plan to marry immediately. Once we are wed, Quinn will be taking over the management of the ranch. We are prepared to work out a new payment schedule with the bank." Winters studied Quinn for a long moment. "And what experience do you have with ranching, Mr. Vaughn?" "I grew up on a ranch in Montana, sir," Quinn replied evenly. "I have worked cattle from here to Wyoming. I know the business and I know how to make a profit, even in hard times." "Montana," Winters repeated, as if the word left a bad taste in his mouth. "And what brings you to Texas?" "Opportunity," Quinn said simply, "and the chance to build something of my own." Winters was silent, clearly weighing his options. Eleanor held her breath. Everything depended on this moment. "Very well," Winters said finally. "Once you are legally married, come back to see me. We can discuss restructuring the loan. But understand this, if you default again, there will be no more extensions, no more chances. The bank will take the property and that will be the end of it." "Understood," Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, Mr. Winters." Outside the bank, Eleanor leaned against the wagon, her legs suddenly weak. Quinn placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked. "I will be," Eleanor said. That was the hardest part. The rest should be easier. The church was at the far end of town. a simple white building with a tall steeple. Reverend Matthews was a kind man in his 50s who had presided over Thomas's funeral. He looked surprised to see Eleanor with a strange man but invited them into his office. Eleanor explained the situation as delicately as she could, leaving out the more desperate details. She simply said that she and Quinn had met and decided to marry, and they wanted to do so as soon as possible. The Reverend looked between them with concern in his eyes. "Marriage is a sacred bond," he said gently, "not something to be entered into lightly. Have you given this proper consideration?" "We have, Reverend," Eleanor said. "I know it seems sudden, but we are both certain this is what we want." Reverend Matthews turned to Quinn. "Young man, do you understand the commitment you are making? To love and honor this woman, in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parts you." Quinn met the Reverend's gaze steadily. "I do, sir. I give you my word that I will honor this commitment and do right by Eleanor." The Reverend sighed but nodded. "Very well. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon if you can find 2 witnesses." They found witnesses easily enough. Martha Keene, who ran the general store, had been a friend to Eleanor since she first came to Abilene. Despite her surprise, she agreed immediately. Her husband Robert served as the second witness. The ceremony was brief and simple. Eleanor stood in the quiet church beside a man she had known for less than 24 hours and repeated vows that bound them together for life. Quinn's voice was steady as he promised to love and cherish her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her cheek gently, respectfully, nothing more. As they left the church, now legally married, Eleanor felt as if she were moving through a dream. Everything had happened so quickly. Just yesterday morning, she had been alone and desperate. Now she had a husband, a partner, and at least a fighting chance to save her home. They returned to the bank with their marriage certificate. Winters examined it thoroughly, as if looking for some flaw or forgery, but finally nodded his approval. He drew up new papers, listing Quinn as co-owner of the property and extending the loan for another year, with monthly payments that would be difficult but not impossible if the ranch could turn a profit. By the time they left Abilene, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both exhausted from the day's events. When they finally arrived home, Eleanor felt the full weight of what had happened settle over her. She was married again, to a stranger who was now her legal husband, who had tied his fate to hers for reasons she still did not fully understand. That night, as she lay in her bed, she heard Quinn moving around in his room. The house felt different now, charged with an unfamiliar energy. She had thought this would be a simple business arrangement, but already she could feel it becoming more complicated. There was something about Quinn, something in his quiet strength and steady presence, that unsettled her in ways she could not quite name. The next morning began a new routine. Quinn rose early and immediately set to work assessing the ranch. He walked the property line, examining fences and water sources. He checked on the cattle, noting their condition. He inspected the barn and the equipment, making lists in his head of what needed immediate attention and what could wait. Eleanor watched him work, impressed by his efficiency and knowledge. He did not waste motion or time. Everything he did had purpose. By noon, he had a plan. "The fences need repair first," he told Eleanor over lunch. "If we do not secure the boundaries, we will lose cattle to wandering or theft. After that, we need to dig out the creek bed, see if we can get better water flow. The cattle are thin but healthy enough. With better grazing and water, they will recover." "That will take a lot of work," Eleanor said. "It will," Quinn agreed, "but I am not afraid of work. And I am hoping you will help me. This is your ranch, Eleanor, your land. I am just here to help you save it." Something in his words touched her deeply. He did not try to take over or push her aside. He treated her as an equal partner, and that was something Thomas had rarely done. They worked together through the long, hot days that followed. Eleanor had always been capable, but Thomas had kept her mostly to the house, handling what he considered women's work. Quinn had no such restrictions. He taught her how to properly mend fences, how to read the signs of where water might be found underground, how to assess cattle for disease or injury. In turn, she shared her knowledge of the land where the best grazing had been before the drought, where the natural springs sometimes surfaced after rain. They worked side by side from sunrise to sunset, their hands blistering and their backs aching. In the evenings, they ate simple meals and fell into bed exhausted. There was no time or energy for anything beyond survival. But slowly, gradually, Eleanor began to notice things about Quinn. The way he always made sure she drank enough water during the hottest part of the day. How he took the heaviest, most difficult tasks without complaint. The gentle way he handled the horses and cattle, never cruel, never harsh. The sound of his voice when he sang to himself, while working old cowboy songs she half remembered from her childhood. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. Not with lust or improper interest, but with something softer, almost tender. It confused her and frightened her in equal measure. 3 weeks after their marriage, the first clouds appeared on the horizon. Eleanor watched them build throughout the afternoon, hardly daring to hope. Quinn stood beside her on the porch as thunder rumbled in the distance. "It is coming," he said quietly. "Real rain, not just a sprinkle." The storm hit just after sunset, and it was glorious. Rain pounded the parched earth, creating rivers in the dust. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the water pour from the sky, and felt tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Quinn was grinning, his face turned up to the sky. "Come on," he said suddenly, grabbing her hand. "What? Where? Just come on." He pulled her off the porch and into the rain. Within seconds they were both soaked through, but Eleanor found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Quinn spun her around in the muddy yard, and she let him, dizzy with relief and joy, and the sheer absurdity of dancing in the rain with a man who had been a stranger a month ago. When they finally stumbled back to the porch, both dripping and breathless, Quinn looked at her with something in his eyes that made her heart skip. But he only said, "We should get dry," and held the door open for her. That night, as Eleanor changed into dry clothes, she realized something had shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained was beginning to crumble. She was not sure how she felt about that. The rain continued through the night and into the next day. When it finally stopped, the land looked transformed. The creek was flowing again, not abundantly but enough. The grass seemed greener already. The cattle stood in the pastures with their faces to the sky as if giving thanks. Quinn and Eleanor surveyed the property together, and Eleanor felt hope blooming in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could actually make this work. As summer faded into autumn, the ranch began to recover. The cattle gained weight. The grass grew. Quinn and Eleanor fell into an easy partnership, working together seamlessly. But something else was growing too, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. It started with small things. Quinn making sure Eleanor's coffee was exactly how she liked it. Eleanor mending a tear in Quinn's favorite shirt without being asked. The way their hands would brush when passing tools, and the jolt of awareness that followed. The increasingly frequent moments when their eyes would meet and hold for just a beat too long. One evening in October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset after a long day of work. The air had finally cooled and there was a pleasant breeze. Eleanor felt content in a way she had not experienced in years. "This is nice," Quinn said quietly. "Peaceful." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "You have done so much, Quinn. I do not know how to thank you. You saved this place. You saved me." Quinn turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very green. "You do not need to thank me, Eleanor. This is my home now, too. I have as much stake in its survival as you do." "Still," Eleanor said, "you did not have to do any of this. You could have just ridden on that day, but you stopped, and you helped me when I had no right to expect help from anyone." "Everyone deserves help," Quinn said. "And you are not just anyone, Eleanor. You are remarkable. The way you have fought to keep this place, the strength you have shown, I have never met anyone like you." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "I am not remarkable, I am just stubborn." "You are both," Quinn said with a small smile, "and a lot of other things besides." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Eleanor's heart was pounding. She should go inside, maintain the distance they had agreed upon, but she did not want to. For the first time since Thomas died, she did not want to be alone. "Quinn," she said softly, "this arrangement we made, the business partnership, does it have to stay that way?" Quinn's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that maybe things have changed. Maybe we have changed." She turned to face him fully. "You are a good man, Quinn Vaughn. And I find myself caring about you in ways I did not expect." "Eleanor," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been trying so hard not to overstep, not to make you uncomfortable. But the truth is, I started falling for you about 3 days after I met you. Watching you work, seeing your determination, your kindness, your strength, you are everything I never knew I wanted." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I am scared," she admitted. "Thomas and I, we had a good marriage, but it was never like this. I never felt like this. What if I do this wrong? What if I disappoint you?" Quinn reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand. "You could never disappoint me. And you do not have to be scared. We can take this as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere, Eleanor. This is my home and you are my wife. I meant those vows I spoke, even if we both thought it was just for show. I want to honor them truly if you will let me." Eleanor leaned into his touch, her heart full to bursting. "I want that too," she whispered. Quinn leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Eleanor did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. She kissed him back, pouring all her confused feelings and new hope into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eleanor Harper Vaughn," he said. "I know it is fast and maybe it is crazy, but it is true." "I love you too," Eleanor said, and saying the words out loud felt like breaking free from a cage she had not known she was in. "I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks now. I was just too scared to admit it." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, talking and kissing and making quiet plans for a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. When they finally went inside, Quinn hesitated at the door to his room. "I can still sleep here," he said. "If you are not ready for anything more, I meant what I said about going slow." Eleanor considered for a moment, then shook her head. "I do not want slow tonight. I want you. I want my husband." Quinn's eyes darkened with desire, but his touch remained gentle as he took her hand and followed her to the bedroom that would now be theirs together. The winter that followed was the happiest Eleanor could remember. She and Quinn worked the ranch during the day and fell into each other's arms at night. Their physical relationship was a revelation to Eleanor, who had never experienced such passion and tenderness combined. Quinn was an attentive and generous lover, and with him, she discovered aspects of herself she had not known existed. But it was not just the physical connection that deepened between them. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Quinn told her about his childhood in Montana, the joy of growing up on the land and the devastation of losing it all. Eleanor spoke about her parents, who had died in a typhoid outbreak when she was 20, and how she had married Thomas partly out of loneliness and the need for security. "I cared for him," she told Quinn one night as they lay tangled together. "But I never loved him the way I love you. Is that terrible to say?" "No," Quinn said, stroking her hair. "It is honest. Not all marriages are love matches, especially out here. People do what they need to do to survive." "Like we did," Eleanor said. "Like we did," Quinn agreed. "Except somewhere along the way it became real." "It feels like it was always real," Eleanor said. "Like I was just waiting for you to show up on my porch that day." Quinn kissed her forehead. "I am glad I found you, Eleanor. This is everything I wanted and did not know how to ask for." As winter melted into spring, they made plans to expand the herd. The grass was coming in thick after the rains, and the cattle they had were healthy and breeding. Quinn suggested they attend the cattle auction in Fort Worth, see if they could afford to buy a few good breeding bulls and maybe a dozen heifers. It was a risk, taking on more debt when they were still digging out from under the first loan. But Eleanor trusted Quinn's judgment, and more than that, she trusted their partnership. Together, they could make this work. The trip to Fort Worth took 3 days. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together, and Eleanor found herself enjoying the journey. They camped under the stars, and Quinn taught her how to read the constellations. They talked and laughed and made love under the open sky, and Eleanor felt freer than she had ever felt in her life. Fort Worth was overwhelming after the quiet of the ranch. The streets were crowded with cowboys, merchants, gamblers, and women in bright dresses calling from saloon windows. Quinn kept close to Eleanor, his hand always on her elbow or the small of her back, protective but not possessive. The cattle auction was held in a large pen on the outskirts of town. Hundreds of animals were on offer, and the noise was deafening. Quinn moved through the crowd with confidence, examining cattle with a practiced eye, asking questions of the sellers, negotiating prices. Eleanor watched him work and felt a surge of pride. This was her husband, this capable, intelligent man who had saved her ranch and stolen her heart. They left Fort Worth with 2 young bulls and 15 heifers, all good stock that would improve their herd. The journey back was slower with the cattle, but Eleanor did not mind. She rode beside Quinn, watching him work the animals with easy skill, and felt certain they had made the right choice. Back at the ranch, they integrated the new cattle into the existing herd. The bulls were young but showed promise, and the heifers adapted quickly to their new home. By Eleanor's calculations, if the rain held and the grass stayed good, they would have calves in the spring and could start turning a real profit by the following year. That summer was busy with the endless work of ranching. But no matter how tired they were, Quinn and Eleanor always made time for each other. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, Eleanor leaning against Quinn's chest as he pointed out the stars. They would steal kisses in the barn when they were supposed to be working. They would make love in the afternoon heat, their bodies slick with sweat and desire. One evening in August, as they were cleaning up after supper, Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, and Quinn was at her side immediately. "Eleanor." "What is wrong?" "I do not know," she said. "Just dizzy for a moment. It has passed now." But it happened again the next morning and the morning after that. Eleanor also noticed she was more tired than usual, and certain smells that had never bothered her before suddenly made her stomach turn. It took her almost a week to realize what these symptoms meant. When the understanding finally dawned, she sat down heavily on the porch steps, her hand over her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Quinn found her there when he came back from checking the northern fence line. He dismounted quickly and knelt in front of her, his face creased with worry. "Eleanor, what is it? Are you hurt? Are you sick?" Eleanor looked up at him through her tears and managed a watery smile. "I am not sick. I am pregnant, Quinn. We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed Quinn's face was one Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. Shock, joy, wonder, and love all mingled together. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never discussed children. In the rush of falling in love and saving the ranch, the future had seemed abstract and far away. "Happy." Quinn pulled back to look at her, and there were tears in his eyes too. "Eleanor, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. This is everything. A home, a wife I love more than life itself, and now a child. I never thought I would have any of this." Eleanor laughed through her tears and kissed him. "We are going to be a family, a real family." The months of Eleanor's pregnancy were both wonderful and difficult. The morning sickness passed after the first few weeks, but she tired easily and Quinn worried constantly. He tried to keep her from working too hard, which led to their first real arguments as a married couple. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor snapped one afternoon when Quinn suggested she rest instead of helping him move hay. "I know that," Quinn said, trying to remain patient. "But you are carrying our child, Eleanor. I just want you to be safe." "I will be safe." Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Most of them did not sit around doing nothing for 9 months. "Please," Quinn said, his voice softening. "Just let me worry about you a little. It is my job as your husband." Eleanor sighed, her anger deflating. "I know you are worried. But I need to feel useful. This ranch is as much mine as it is yours. I cannot just stop being a part of it." They compromised. Eleanor continued to work but took more breaks and avoided the heaviest tasks. Quinn learned to accept that his wife was stubborn and strong-willed, and Eleanor learned that Quinn's protectiveness came from a place of deep love, not a desire to control her. As her belly grew, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Quinn converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery of sorts, building a beautiful cradle from oak wood he had been saving for a special project. Eleanor sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her heart swelling with anticipation. In February of 1883, on a cold night when the stars were bright and clear, Eleanor went into labor. Quinn rode like the wind to fetch Martha Keene, who had experience with birthing babies. Martha arrived to find Quinn pacing the porch, pale and terrified. "First-time fathers," Martha said with an amused shake of her head. "Always the most scared people in the room." The labor lasted through the night and into the following morning. Quinn stayed by Eleanor's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement and love. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's green eyes, Quinn wept openly. "He is perfect," Quinn said, cradling his son for the first time. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. Quinn looked at her, then back at the baby. "I want to name him Thomas, after your first husband. He may not have been perfect, but he built this ranch, and that is the foundation our life is built on. It seems right to honor that." Eleanor felt tears well up again. "That is a beautiful gesture, Quinn, but I want him to have a piece of you too. What about Thomas Quinn Vaughn?" "Thomas Quinn Vaughn," Quinn repeated, testing the name. "I like that. Tommy for short." Little Tommy was a good baby, healthy and happy. Quinn was a devoted father, waking in the night to walk with his son when he fussed, singing him the old cowboy songs he had learned as a child. Eleanor would watch them together, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The ranch continued to prosper. The cattle herd grew, and by the spring of 1884 they had enough stock to make their first real profit. Quinn rode into Abilene and paid off a large chunk of their bank loan, much to Horace Winter's surprise. "You have done well for yourself, Vaughn," Winters admitted grudgingly. "I had my doubts, but you have proven yourself." "We have done well," Quinn corrected. "My wife and I are partners in this. None of it would have been possible without her." As Tommy grew from a baby into a toddler, he showed signs of being as stubborn and independent as his mother, and as steady and determined as his father. He learned to walk early, taking his first steps across the porch to where Quinn was waiting with open arms. His first word was "Papa," which made Quinn grin for days. Eleanor sometimes thought back to that day when Quinn had ridden up to her porch, a stranger with an impossible proposal. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 3 years. So much had changed. She had changed. The scared, desperate widow had become a confident woman, secure in her marriage and her partnership with her husband. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Tommy play in the yard, Quinn took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," Eleanor said. "About how close I came to losing everything and how you saved me." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected gently. "I was drifting, Eleanor, with no purpose and no home. You gave me both. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building." "I love you," Eleanor said simply. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Quinn replied. "You and Tommy are my whole world." In the summer of 1885, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In February of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful girl with Eleanor's dark hair and delicate features but Quinn's green eyes. They named her Sarah Elizabeth Vaughn, after Quinn's mother and Eleanor's mother, honoring the women who had come before them. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector, a role he took very seriously for a 3-year-old. The years passed in a blur of hard work, joy, and love. The ranch grew more prosperous each year. They paid off the bank loan entirely in 1887, and Quinn rode home with the satisfaction of knowing the land was truly theirs, free and clear. That night, they celebrated with a special dinner, and Quinn gave Eleanor a gift he had been saving for, a beautiful gold locket with photographs of Tommy and Sarah inside. "So you always carry them close to your heart," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Eleanor touched the locket and then pulled Quinn into a deep kiss. "I do not need a locket to carry you all in my heart. You are always with me, but I love it. Thank you." By 1888, Tommy was 5 and Sarah was 2. The ranch had 60 head of cattle, 3 good horses, and fields that produced enough hay to see them through the winter with surplus to sell. They had built a new barn and expanded the house, adding a proper nursery and a larger kitchen. Eleanor stood on the porch one morning, watching Quinn teach Tommy how to rope a fence post. Her son was concentrating hard, his little face screwed up in determination. Quinn was patient and encouraging, praising every attempt. Sarah sat on the porch steps, playing with a rag doll Martha had made for her. This was happiness, Eleanor thought. This simple, ordinary moment was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. A home, a family, a man who loved her with every fiber of his being, and the satisfaction of knowing they had built this life together through hard work, determination, and love. Quinn looked up and caught her watching. He smiled that slow smile that still made her heart skip, even after all these years. He said something to Tommy, who waved enthusiastically at his mother, then walked over to the porch. "What is that look for?" Quinn asked, climbing the steps and wrapping his arms around her waist. Just thinking about how happy I am, Eleanor said, leaning into his embrace. How perfect this life is. It is pretty perfect, Quinn agreed. He kissed the top of her head. Though I seem to remember a time when you thought this was an impossible dream. I did, Eleanor admitted. When you rode up that day, dusty and tired and offering to marry me to save my land, I thought you were either crazy or too good to be true. Turns out I was a little of both, Quinn said with a laugh. Turns out you were exactly what I needed, Eleanor corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. You saved me, Quinn, not just the ranch, but me. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. You gave me this beautiful life. And you gave me a home when I had none, Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me a purpose and a family. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. They kissed, long and sweet, while their children played around them and the land they had fought so hard to keep stretched out in all directions. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and the future looked bright. That night, after the children were asleep, Quinn and Eleanor lay in bed talking about the future. They wanted more children, maybe 1 or 2 more. They talked about expanding the ranch further, maybe buying some of the adjacent land that had gone up for sale. They talked about Tommy going to school and whether they should hire a tutor or send him to the schoolhouse in town. Whatever we do it together, Quinn said firmly. Partners in everything, just like we have always been. Partners, Eleanor agreed, and more than that, best friends. Lovers, parents, everything. Everything, Quinn repeated. He pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Eleanor thought back to that desperate woman who had stood on the porch holding a foreclosure notice, certain her life was over. She had been so scared, so alone. And then a stranger had ridden up with an impossible solution and everything had changed. It had not been easy. There had been hard work, doubt, fear, and plenty of obstacles. But they had faced everything together, and in doing so, they had built something strong and lasting. A marriage that had started as a business arrangement had become a love story, one that would be passed down through their children and grandchildren, as an example of what was possible when 2 people committed to each other completely. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about how life had a strange way of working out. Sometimes the most desperate moments led to the greatest blessings. Sometimes a stranger on a dusty road turned out to be exactly the person you needed. Sometimes a marriage of convenience became a marriage of the heart. And sometimes, when you fought hard enough and loved deeply enough, you got your happy ending after all. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1889, Eleanor gave birth to their 3rd child, a boy they named Daniel Marcus Vaughn. He had Eleanor's dark eyes and Quinn's strong jaw, and from the moment he was born, he had a loud voice and strong opinions about everything. Tommy, now 6, took his role as big brother very seriously. He helped with both Sarah and baby Daniel, showing a gentleness and patience that made both Quinn and Eleanor proud. Sarah, at 3, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, always getting into things and asking endless questions. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They now had over 100 head of cattle, and Quinn had earned a reputation as a fair dealer and a knowledgeable rancher. Other cattlemen sought his advice, and he was often invited to judge livestock at local fairs and auctions. Eleanor had become a respected figure in Abilene as well. She organized a group of ranch women to help each other during difficult times, whether that meant helping with a birth, nursing the sick, or simply providing a listening ear. The women met once a month at the church, and the gatherings became a cherished tradition. In 1891, they were blessed with their fourth child, another daughter they named Grace Ann Vaughn. She was a quiet baby, content to observe the world around her with solemn eyes. Tommy was 8, Sarah was 5, and Daniel was 2, and the house was constantly filled with noise and laughter and the chaotic joy of a large family. Quinn and Eleanor had settled into their roles as parents and partners with easy grace. They still worked the ranch together, though Eleanor spent more time managing the household and the business side of things, while Quinn handled the physical labor and the cattle. They complemented each other perfectly, each bringing their own strengths to the partnership. Their love had deepened over the years, becoming something solid and unshakable. They still made time for each other, stealing quiet moments on the porch after the children were asleep, or taking an occasional ride out to the far pastures where they could be alone. The passion between them had not dimmed with time or the demands of parenthood. If anything, it had grown stronger, tempered by the years of building a life together. One evening in the spring of 1892, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tommy came running up with a book in his hands. "Pa, Ma, will you read to us?" he asked. He was a voracious reader, devouring every book he could get his hands on. "Of course," Eleanor said. "Get your brother and sisters and bring them out here." Soon all 4 children were gathered on the porch, Tommy and Sarah sitting on the steps, Daniel on Quinn's lap, and baby Grace in Eleanor's arms. Quinn read from a book of adventure stories, doing different voices for all the characters, much to the children's delight. Eleanor watched her family, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. This was everything she had ever wanted and so much more. She caught Quinn's eye over the top of Daniel's head, and he smiled at her, that special smile reserved just for her. Later that night, after the children were finally settled in bed, Quinn and Eleanor stood on the porch under the stars. Quinn wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest. "You remember when it was just the 2 of us?" Eleanor asked. "When we were newlyweds and it was so quiet at night." "I do," Quinn said. "Sometimes I miss the quiet, but I would not trade this chaos for anything in the world." "Neither would I," Eleanor agreed. "Our children are our greatest blessing." "Second greatest," Quinn corrected. "You are my greatest blessing, Eleanor. You always have been and you always will be." Eleanor turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. After all these years, his touch still sent shivers down her spine. "I love you, Quinn Vaughn, more than words can say." "I love you too," Quinn murmured against her lips, "for the rest of my life and beyond." As they stood there in the darkness, holding each other close, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Eleanor closed her eyes and made a wish, though she hardly needed to. She already had everything she could possibly want. The ranch, which had once been on the brink of foreclosure, was now one of the most prosperous in the county. The land that Eleanor had fought so hard to keep had become a true home, filled with love and laughter and the promise of generations to come. The children would grow up on this land, learning the value of hard work and the importance of family. They would have the security and stability that both Quinn and Eleanor had lacked in their own lives. In 1894, Tommy turned 11 and started talking about wanting to be a rancher like his father. He spent every spare moment following Quinn around, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and land management. Quinn was patient and thorough, teaching his son not just the practical skills but also the philosophy behind their work. Treat the land with respect, treat the animals humanely, and always deal fairly with others. Sarah, now 8, was showing a talent for numbers and helped her mother with the ranch accounts. She had a sharp mind and a quick wit, and Eleanor knew her daughter would be a force to be reckoned with when she grew up. Daniel, at 5, was the family daredevil, always climbing things he should not and getting into mischief. Grace, at 3, remained the quiet observer, but she had a deep sensitivity and often noticed things that others missed. The family had fallen into comfortable rhythms and traditions. Sunday dinners after church, where they would invite neighbors and friends to share their table. Saturday nights when Quinn would play his guitar and they would all sing together. The annual trip to Fort Worth for the cattle auction, which had become a family adventure. Christmas celebrations filled with homemade gifts and special treats. Summer evenings catching fireflies in the yard. These were the moments that made up a life, Eleanor reflected. Not the grand gestures or dramatic events, but the small, everyday occurrences that wove together to create a tapestry of love and belonging. In the summer of 1895, Horace Winters retired from the bank and was replaced by a younger man named James Crawford. Crawford invited Quinn and Eleanor to the bank for a meeting, and they went with some trepidation, wondering if new management meant new problems, but Crawford surprised them. "I have been reviewing the accounts of all our major clients," he said, "and I wanted to personally commend you both. When I saw your file from 1882, I have to admit I was skeptical. A widow on the verge of foreclosure marries a drifting cowboy, and somehow they turn the ranch into one of the most profitable operations in the county. It is quite a story." "It is our story," Quinn said, taking Eleanor's hand. "And we are proud of it." "You should be," Crawford said. "In fact, I would like to feature you in the bank's quarterly newsletter if you would be willing. I think it would be inspirational to other ranchers who are struggling." Eleanor and Quinn exchanged glances and then nodded. "We would be honored," Eleanor said. The article appeared in the fall and created quite a stir. People they had not heard from in years wrote to congratulate them. Some asked for advice. Others simply wanted to share their own stories of struggle and perseverance. One letter stood out. It was from a young widow in New Mexico who was facing foreclosure on her ranch. She had read their story and wanted to know if Quinn would consider traveling there to give her advice. Quinn was inclined to go, but Eleanor reminded him that they had 4 children and a ranch to run. "But what if we could help her the way we were helped?" Quinn argued. "What if there is someone out there who could be her solution the way I was yours?" Eleanor thought about this and then smiled. "You are a good man, Quinn Vaughn, always thinking of others. All right, we will help. But let us invite her here instead. She can stay with us for a few weeks, learn from what we have built, and maybe she will find her own way forward." And so Maria Santos came to stay at the Vaughn Ranch in the winter of 1895. She was a young widow with 2 small children, and her story was heartbreakingly similar to Eleanor's. Quinn and Eleanor spent hours teaching her about ranch management, finances, and the hard work of building something from nothing. They also introduced her to some of the single ranchers in the area, thinking that perhaps she might find her own Quinn. As it turned out, she did. John Mitchell was a widower with a small ranch adjacent to Maria's land in New Mexico. When he heard about her situation through a mutual friend, he traveled to Abilene to meet her. Within a month, they were courting, and by spring, they were married and combining their ranches. "You started something good here," Maria said tearfully as she prepared to return home with her new husband. "You showed me that it was possible to find hope in the darkest times. Thank you for that." "Thank you for reminding us where we came from," Eleanor replied, embracing the younger woman, "and for letting us pass on the blessing we received." As the years moved toward the turn of the century, the Vaughn family continued to grow and thrive. Tommy graduated from the local school at the top of his class and chose to stay on the ranch rather than pursue further education. He had found his calling, and Quinn was thrilled to have his eldest son as a true partner in the business. Sarah also completed school and surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher. Eleanor and Quinn supported her decision and sent her to the normal school in Austin to get her teaching certificate. She returned to Abilene and took a position at the local schoolhouse, becoming a beloved and respected educator. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, talked constantly about becoming a cavalry officer or an explorer. Grace, now 10, remained quiet and thoughtful but had developed a talent for drawing and painting. Her sketches of ranch life were remarkably detailed and expressive. In 1899, as the world prepared to enter a new century, Quinn and Eleanor took stock of their lives. They were both in their early 40s now, no longer the young people who had taken such a desperate chance on each other 17 years before. They had gray threads in their hair and lines on their faces, earned through years of hard work and worry and laughter. But they had also built something remarkable, a thriving ranch, a family that was close and loving, a community that respected and valued them. And most importantly, a marriage that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. On New Year's Eve, as 1899 turned to 1900, the entire family gathered on the porch to watch the stars and welcome the new century. Tommy stood tall beside his father, already looking like the rancher he was becoming. Sarah, home from her teaching duties, held little Grace's hand. Daniel bounced with excitement, wondering what adventures the new century would bring. Quinn put his arm around Eleanor and pulled her close. "A new century," he said quietly. "Who would have thought back in 1882 that we would be here now?" "I try not to think about what might have been," Eleanor said. "I only think about what is, and what is pretty damn wonderful." Quinn laughed at her rare use of profanity and kissed her soundly, much to the groaning protests of their children. "Get used to it, kids," Quinn said with a grin. "Your mother and I are still in love, and we are not going to stop showing it just because you find it embarrassing." As midnight struck and the new century officially began, the family cheered and embraced. Eleanor looked around at the faces of her children, at her husband's beloved features, at the land that stretched out in all directions, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She thought back to that terrified widow who had stood on this very porch clutching a foreclosure notice, certain her world was ending. She had been so wrong. Her world had not been ending. It had been about to begin. Quinn Vaughn, the stranger who became her savior, and then her husband and finally her soulmate, had given her everything she needed to not just survive but thrive. Together they had built a life that was rich in every way that mattered. Not just in material success, though they had achieved that beyond their wildest dreams, but in love, family, community, and purpose. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. They became grandparents when Tommy married a local girl named Catherine and gave them 2 grandsons. Sarah met a fellow teacher and married him, moving to Houston but visiting frequently. Daniel eventually joined the Army, fulfilling his dream of adventure, though he always came home to the ranch when he could. Grace married a traveling artist and went with him to see the world, sending back beautiful paintings and long letters. Through it all, Quinn and Eleanor remained the steady center of their growing family. They continued to work the ranch together, though as they aged, they delegated more responsibility to Tommy and his wife. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching sunsets and counting grandchildren, and reflecting on the extraordinary journey their lives had taken. In 1920, as they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary, Eleanor and Quinn stood together on that same porch where Quinn had first proposed his audacious plan. They were in their 60s now, gray-haired and slower moving but still strong, still working, still deeply in love. "Do you have any regrets?" Eleanor asked, a question she had never thought to ask before. Quinn considered this seriously, as he considered all her questions. "Only one," he said finally. "I regret that I did not have the courage to ride up to your porch sooner. We could have had even more years together." Eleanor laughed and swatted his arm. "That is not a real regret. You came exactly when you were supposed to, not a moment too soon or too late." "I suppose you are right," Quinn agreed. He pulled her into his arms, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. "I love you, Eleanor Vaughn. I have loved you from almost the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Eleanor whispered, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved my life, Quinn. In every way a person can be saved." They stood there as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had taken a chance on each other when they had nothing left to lose and had gained everything worth having. Their love story had started with desperation and a stranger's kindness, but it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of trust, hard work, and choosing to love even when it seemed impossible. The ranch that Eleanor had nearly lost was now a thriving operation that would be passed down through generations. The land was rich and productive, home to cattle and horses, and a large, loving family. The house had been expanded several times and was filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and family gathering. But more than the physical legacy, Quinn and Eleanor had created something intangible but infinitely more valuable. They had shown their children and grandchildren what true partnership looked like. They had demonstrated that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made fresh every day. They had proven that the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Quinn and Eleanor went inside, hand in hand, ready to share another evening meal with whatever family members had gathered. Tomorrow they would rise early and begin the work again, side by side as they had been for nearly 4 decades. They would tend the land, care for the animals, solve problems, and make decisions together. And at the end of the day, they would return to this porch, to this view to each other. Because that had always been the real treasure. Not the land, though they had fought so hard to keep it. Not the money, though they had earned plenty through their efforts. Not even the family, though they were the greatest blessing of all. The real treasure was the love they had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. A widow about to lose her land. A cowboy looking for a home. A marriage of convenience that became a marriage of the heart. A desperate gamble that paid off beyond anything either of them could have imagined. That was the true happy ending. Not a fairy tale conclusion where all problems magically disappeared, but a real, earned happiness built on years of choosing each other, supporting each other, and loving each other through whatever life threw their way. And as they sat down to dinner that night, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the life they had built together, Eleanor caught Quinn's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. And she smiled back, knowing that every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment in this place with this man. Their love story would live on long after they were gone, told and retold to future generations as an example of what was possible when two people committed to building something together. The widow and the cowboy who married to save her land and ended up saving each other. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love, and it was the truest, most beautiful story either of them had ever known.